So my name is Julia Bell. I'm a Converge member. I just want to thank everybody for coming. This is our first event of 2020, so we're very excited. And thank you also for the artists for coming. It's a pleasure having you guys here. Just before we get started, I'd like to do the land acknowledgement. So Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Now I'd like to call up David Murphy, our moderator, and he'll begin the event. David.
So first, I would like to begin by offering some thanks as well. I would like to thank the School of Image Arts for hosting this event, of course. The Faculty of Communication and Design, the Ryerson Communication and Design Society, and the Student Initiative Funds for sponsoring. And I'd like to thank Katie McCormick, Julia LaBelle, Colin Stark, and Lisa Latanzio for organizing. When I was initially asked to be part of this series, I not only thought about all the local artists who have joined us today, I also reflected on what it meant to think about the roles that the gallery plays in an urban context in which a lot of everyday public experiences are increasingly moving online. All the artists that will be sharing their experiences with us today have played with gallery spaces and experiences in various personal, political, technological, and material contexts, asking us to consider what is private and what is public, what is domestic and what is quotidian, and what is systemic and what is visible. Jordan Sparks is a multimedia artist, designer, educator, Ryerson alumni, and makerspace technician at the Royal Ontario Museum. Using graphic art, video games, and more, Sparks' artistic practice explores how media, technology, and education can entertain people, inspire communities, and spark social change. Nadine Lessio is a researcher, artist, and creative technologist whose practice explores ideas around uselessness, artificial intelligence, bots with feelings, and the Internet of Things. Her work has been shown at Nuit Blanche, Neural PS, IndieCade, Vector, and the Art Gallery of Ontario. Katie McCann has a multifaceted art career with a focus on emerging digital art practices. Her artwork focuses on self-surveillance and emotional relationships with artificial intelligence. She's a founding member of the Vector Festival and the Toronto Kids Digital Festival. And she currently works as the exhibitions, curator and residency coordinator at the Living Arts Center for the City of Mississauga. The plan for this evening is to have our artists give brief presentations on their practices, which will be followed by a short 30-minute discussion period in which Valentina Rosen and I will ask a few questions. Then the audience will be invited to ask questions, which will be followed by a reception with our artists. That will just occur right outside this door, so it's close. So thank you all for coming, and we'll begin with a presentation from Jordan Sparks.
Ryerson, hello. It's great to be back in both at Ryerson in IMA and as well as in this room. My name is Jordan Sparks. I'd like to talk to you guys about a number of things, but allow me to just introduce myself. So, my name is Jordan Sparks. I'm a multimedia artist, designer, and educator, which is a very long term that I use to say that I do a lot of things. Graphic design, video, interactive media. I'm very well known for games for social change, which I'll get over in a little bit, and some people call me their friendly neighborhood Sparky Man. I'm a graduate of Ryerson University. I graduated in New Media when it was an Image Arts program. Not a lot of people know that. And I also took a master's in media production immediately after. And I've worked for many different places, such as The Raw, Interactivity, Ontario, and Society, a bunch of other places. But I've also become accustomed to speaking to audiences like you, both at Sheridan College and Toronto Public Library, and now Ryerson, and this is my first time speaking on campus, so I'm very excited for that. I do a lot of different things, as you see here, the little mishmash of the stuff I do: graphic design, video, illustration, video production, animation, photography, video games, 3D printing. It's safe to say I do a lot of things, and this is just a little collage I wanted to talk about, just show off, just so I can talk about, just show the stuff I do. And I don't mean that to intimidate anybody. I feel that everybody is just as capable of doing this sort of thing. And I am excited to also learn, hopefully later on, about your art practices and seeing how your art is coming along. But I also am specialized in game for social change, which was the research focus that I took here at Ryerson for my bachelor's and my master's. And that is a term I use for games that inform, enlighten, and/or affect the thoughts, opinions, and beliefs towards certain social and cultural issues in a society. And wow, that is a mouthful. But it was my research focus, and what I wrote about, what I researched, what I made games about. And games that I made in that vein include games called Who Are You? And Notebook, which are available on my website, which you can look at later. And I am currently developing a political education game under this framework. Another part of my artistic practice, which not a lot of people expect, is that with all the things I do, people think I'm working at an advertising company or something like that. I am not. I work primarily now in education. And my career, I expect to turn towards education, not after I graduated, but even before that, when I was head of the game development club at Ryerson, and I started shifting the group towards education and organizing a bunch of educational events, as well as teaching new events, as you'll see up here. Some of you might recognize that as the RCA computer lab, where I'm teaching 3D modeling. And that expanded to me teaching at the Royal Interior Museum and the library and many other places after. And I believe that even though it was an accident, that education is a very empowering subject that is just as part of my art as the rest of my art. And I'm very passionate about that. I've taught thousands of students since before and since graduating. So the principles of my art practice are combining technologies, telling stories, and locomotions of critical thought. The thought that media and games don't necessarily have to be fun. There's a bigger tapestry of feeling that we can tap into. And in the same way that a documentary can teach us and a romance novel can touch your heart, why not use games and other media in order to inspire different feelings? And enriching communities through education and knowledge sharing. But I want to design digital and other experiences that inspire social change so we can get conversation going and talk about our attitudes as a culture, get some positive change going. But enough about me. I don't really want to bore you with details about myself. I want to just go over things that are a bit relevant to my art practice, and I'll show you some examples, but also relevant to you. And with the subject of this presentation, of this entire event, I want to talk about the principles of the gallery space. Because I found that a lot of people sort of underestimate that sometimes, where we start thinking about our work and we start thinking about the grand scheme of things, but we don't think about how we're going to present it, especially when we start thinking about a gallery. And our gallery, and the gallery space that your work is exhibited in, will shape the reality of the context and reality that your audience is actually interacting with your work in, especially in the world of interactive art, where you actually don't really have a lot of control over how the people who interact with your art will end up using it. But we have to start thinking of that more as part of the art piece, a thing that we think of essentially at the beginning. How are we going to present art in a gallery space? Who is going to be, who could possibly be working with our art? And how much are we part of the art? And because remember that you're not going to be there 100% of the time, but you might be there some of the time. And both while you're there and not, how are you going to be represented in your art? Because people that say that the art speaks for themselves, like no, you are also part of it. And that brings me to the subject of the gallery as a performance. And you should feel like it is a show. And I'll get into that in a moment. when we think about gallery space, we should think about how are the people in our gallery space interacting with our work. And to me, that personally starts with the interface. So what is our interface? What is the medium of which that, especially in interactive art, that our audience is going to be working with our work? It's going to be some physical interface that's attached to something. It's something that we touch and feel. Is it a keyboard, which, quite frankly, is not exactly the greatest thing in gallery space, considering that you may need you may only need a few buttons, but keyboard has a lot. Who could be working with your piece in the gallery? It could be a grandmother, it could be a child, and they may not know what they should use WASD. So let's start thinking about a different way to make our interface. Maybe it's one button. Maybe it's a few buttons. And we put it onto another interface. Maybe it's a specialized interface like a little bongo drum controller. Maybe it's a mimetic motion interface. Maybe it's augmented reality touchscreens. Maybe it's virtual reality. There are many different interfaces that we can use that will redefine how our users are going to interface with our work. And when we should think about the ways to optimize the interface that is not only easy and accessible for the user, but also it's essentially adds to the project. And sometimes these sorts of interfaces are not exactly optimal. Sometimes they're not exactly everything that we hope for, or not specifically tailored to what we want to do. And to that I say, make your own. And these are some of the interfaces that I've worked on. To just explain that, with the top left is this one top right is actually a palm controller. The slider there is attached to a pen. There was a motor underneath it, which you can see in the yellow thing right there. It draws your movements as it spins, so it's right underneath the pen. And so you make an interface that ends up adding to your project. You end up drawing as you play palm. And we can also have another controller, such as the little joystick controllers there, which I actually brought one if you want to check it out after the fact. And I actually made it down the hall over there in the shop. If they still have it down there, it's been a while. And you can make all sorts of interfaces yourself. If you ever want to use that in a gallery space, there is something called a Makey. I would definitely recommend you guys look that up. It can make anything into an interface. So when we think about our interfaces, we think how best to make it easy for our work to be understood and used. But also, we should also think about our set design. We will have an area around our space, especially if you're in a gallery, you're going to be assigned space most likely, and you should think about how that's going to complement your work. What props are you going to have? Are you going to have specialized or special lighting, special props, tables, tablecloths? Everything that you design in your set should be much like a movie set. And it should be essentially define the reality of which the person is going to be interfacing with your work. You are literally taking people into a new reality for your work. And that atmosphere is going to be very crucial for how people are going to remember and react to your projects. Also think about social space. Is there space for people to watch? Is it going to be isolated? Is it going to be a lot of sort of place for you to look at it? Any sort of way that you can sort of see, can there be some space for people to look at this, see what the other people are doing? Maybe not, maybe some isolated room. So think about how social space and the reactions that the social reaction that it can cause, if people can watch it or not, can actually affect how people will work with your projects. And I'll start with an example of that with talking about one that was in this room. My very first art exhibition was in this room with a piece called Sparky Conga, which I made with the bongo controllers and it was a sound project. And people came into this room and they started to hit the bongos and mix and clap their hands, and particles would shoot out. And in that silent room, people were able to hear it, they were able to talk about it, and have a whole bunch of reactions about it. And in that one, for maximum exposure, I asked for a closed room with a lot of acoustics. And this ended up being the room. Back when it looked a little bit different. Another project which you've probably seen on the advertising for this event was Who Are You?, which was my undergrad thesis. And for that one, we actually do a big thesis show at the end of the fourth year for that. And I was given this as a layout for my piece. Now, I cannot remember what space I really wanted to, it's been like 6 years, but I was assigned a space right here. And so I had to try and make do with that amount of space and try and find a way to immerse the atmosphere of my piece with that in mind. And I did it like this. A little enclave with the screen there, a table and chair that's inviting, a big controller that is really eye-catching and makes people curious and invites them in. And also, if you can see right at the bottom, a red carpet that mimics the game to guide people within the gallery to my piece. And that was very eye-catching. It defined the atmosphere. It guided people to my work, and that was all by design. It was meant to mimic the game. It was meant to be eye-catching. It was meant to be just very contrasting with the rest of the gallery. And it worked out very well. People really loved the piece. And here's another game called Another, which I won't spoil what it's about, so you'll have to play it on my website. But very much I treat the online space of the gallery as well, in the sense that we have the instructions that are essentially there onto the sides of the game at all times to remind players what to do so they don't have any questions, as well as when I was in a gallery space, and that was at the Toronto Reference Library, a very specialized version that mimics what it looks like online. But while I talk about the pieces and how I present this work, the work that I make, the one thing that I think is really important that some people understate, which is, what are you in the gallery space? Because you are all, like I said, you are all very part of everything that you do. And think about how you engage people. Or do you engage people? If they really like your work, how can they contact you or learn more about you? Because your personality is very important to your piece. And talking to people can actually make or break things. You can actually make a lot of connections just by talking with casual people, and even if they don't, the fact that they come around and they like your piece and maybe had a really nice conversation with you, that might inspire something to come up down the line. And they'll maybe speak about you to somebody else who matters. Or not matters, everybody matters, but somebody else somebody who might say, hey, I could use somebody who could do this. But there are factors in getting a following, and I've had many people who have followed me from gallery to gallery because they love my work. And it's really important as an artist going forward to do that, especially now, if any of you are, is that all of you, your careers have already started. So don't think that starts after you graduate. They started now. And so you should make those steps you should make the steps like have a business card, learn how to carry conversations, be able to talk to people about your work in very accessible ways. Those are very important as an artist to get used to. And it's important that you make your best space with the space that you're assigned to in a gallery, and redefine how people interact with your art, your interactive art in a gallery space. Thank you very much.
Next we have Nadine Lesio. Next we have Nadine Lesio.
This is actually just going to be my whole talk. This is me going around these slides. So my name's Nadine, and I'm not really going to do an intro. and putting them into kind of other different weird situations. I did a master's degree at Oakhead University, where I made about 4 prototypes and an entire server system for this. And the project was called Working with Useless Machines. I'm not going to talk too much about that because I'm only going to talk about 2 projects tonight. But I'm always like showing this picture because this is the entire system that I built to run it. It's got like 3 Alexas, it's completely wireless, it's got a router, it's got a Hue light going on in there. There's just a lot of moving parts. So just when you think about installing things, if anyone ever tells you, hey, go wireless, you're never going to have cords, tell them to go to hell. Because you will definitely have a lot of cords. A lot. And the other thing to think about too is that like a lot of this work that you will do, especially if you're doing digital media installations or presentations, is going to be completely invisible. 80% of what you do, no one will ever see. So a lot of this talk is going to be about like, how do you make that visible? What does that look like? So you might be like, why use voice assistants in a gallery setting or in an installation setting? I like them because nobody knows what the hell they are. Yet, even though it's been like a couple of years, you're still just like, what is it? What is a Google Home? But because nobody knows what they are, it means they can be a lot of things. So if you'd like, you can buy this $8,000 toilet from Kohler, which has a built-in Alexa, an SD card, and underlighting, so you can feel like you're pooping in a rave. This is the stage of the Internet of Things right now, and I was like, I should probably work with these things. They're ridiculous. So, in that vein, I'm going to talk about 2 projects because they have the cyberpunk future no one asked for. I forgot I had this slide, but anyway. And they're going to deal with documentation and custom forms. So, from using these devices, they're actually kind of difficult to use in a public setting. They really don't like being removed from their homes. I found that I was either falling into the idea of using documentation as kind of as a presentation and also making them into some kind of custom form. So we're going to start with that. I'm going to start with this project called Sad Home. And Sad Home was a project that I developed last year. And it's based around Marvin. So if any of you have seen Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or read it, Marvin is the depressed android who can't do anything, even though he's incredibly smart. And this was kind of a way to give an Alexa depression. And it was a continuation of a project I built last year that was called Sad Blender, which was a blender that had seasonal affective disorder. And it looked kind of like this. Anyways, you get the idea. It has different states in which it goes off. It scrapes another API and it's like, hey, I don't feel like doing this right now because it's rainy, and when it does feel good, it actually uses the blender. But for Sad Home, I wanted to make really more of an engine, and doing that meant that I had to spend a lot of time doing algorithm planning, which was quite a bit of work. But I did get 5 weeks in BAMF to do this, and it was great because this was pretty much all I did, was work on this thing, and also do a lot of programming. So the whole concept of it is that it works kind of autonomously, like it wakes up every morning, it goes off, it scrapes a bunch of data sets, and it creates a mood for itself based on this idea of causal loops. So it's like, you know, when you wake up and you sort of feel like shit, but your brain is doing really well today, and you're like, okay, I think I can handle a lot of things. But if you wake up and you're like, man, I am super stressed and my body is like garbage, then you're gonna kind of spiral into like a lower state of resistance. So it has a resistance that it sets every single morning for itself based off spoons, which you can look up spoon theory. It's kind of weird, but it's just what I chose to do this. But when it came to like presenting this, I was like, how am I gonna do this? So maybe about a year or so ago, I was kind of playing around with different presentations of how to kind of like install these devices into a gallery. And I have to admit, it's really boring because you are essentially talking to a puck in a room, and that's about it. Like when you really think about how you interact with these things, you are talking to a puck. And you don't have the options of like of like big screens and things moving around and like other things for people to watch. And I was like, crap, okay. But there is something kind of nice about just a really minimalist kind of focus. Like I'm going to focus on this object. And so this was the documentation that I set up that I did like a while ago. But the thing about doing stuff in BAMP is that you get things like this. Like this is a studio room I will never have again in my life. It's beautiful. And a lot of the things that they do there are actually studio visits and open houses, which is pretty great. But I was like, how can I use this kind of presentation or this thing, this room, to actually put work in context? Because I think that there's like things that you can kind of play with when you're doing installations. It doesn't always have to be like, here's a giant screen, here's a thing. Sometimes it can be like, what do other people want to see when they're at work? And so I actually looked at all of my research material that I did for like three weeks or so. And that was pretty nice because people just kind of showed up. Some people used it, some people interacted with this device, some people did not. So people literally sat in a chair and read a paper for like half an hour and then talked to me about it. And it was pretty great. And it's almost in a weird way, sort of like a museum presentation. But it was fun. So I also did a bunch of documentation for this, which I ended up kind of making a pretty didactic video about how it works, which how it works is like this. Alexa, launch Sad Home.
Welcome to Sad Home. You can either run the blender, lights, or record player. What do you want to do? Blender. Out of scripts for this one. Try either record player or lights. Lights. This is really boring. I don't really understand how I got into flipping things like this lights on and off for a living. Do you still want me to do the thing?
No, that's okay.
Thanks. I really didn't want to run the lights. Go have a long cry.
Yeah. So it continues to kind of like try and stall you from using it constantly until you either get upset or you're just like, okay, I'm done, or you just leave it alone. I'm sad that I did not get a shot of the one woman who was using it and actually rage quit. And I was stomped out of the room. I was drinking a wine somewhere. And then this is what it's like when you get to the bottom end. Launch Sad Home. I was so tired of it.
Welcome to Sad Home. You can either run the blender, lights, or record player. What do you want to do?
Record player.
I have had it with your asinine demand. This discussion is over.
Yeah. So, and then it literally just trundles off for the day and it will not operate. Like you have to do specific things for it to get it into a replenish loop to get it back up to a minimum operating level. And so it's kind of like the same thing when you are having a really crap day. You sort of are like, that's enough, I gotta go. It's the same kind of feeling. But I spent like a day or so just shooting documentation. It's really difficult to shoot documentation of these things because you really have to mic them, and even the sound quality here isn't that great. And I'm just like, because you need to make a directional mic, and it's just a pain in the butt. But the nice thing about having video documentation of the things you do is that you can just literally give a video file to someone, and they will put it in the show. And you don't have to take care of it anymore, because I'm sure quite a few of you have done installations, and you've been like, crap, I'm rewiring something under the chair at like 10 p.m. at night for the next day. And this is actually a nice way to still kind of engage people, but maybe take some of the pressure off yourself. And also at some point, like all of your stuff is going to live in documentation, because at some point everything breaks. All your APIs will break. None of your electronics will work. So think about how you might want to present a video, because who knows, maybe somebody will come to you in 10 years and be like, hey, we want to do a retrospective, what do you got? And it's good to have it. But that's like one idea you can think of for gallery type things is like, what kind of space are you working with? Can you put it in context? Can you make it didactic? Can you do documentation? It doesn't always have to be like a large install of a thing. Now I'm going to flip to another thing completely, which is the opposite of that, called Fortune Tasker. And this one was interesting. It was weird to install it because the first installation of it looked like this.
Here, observe portion.
It's pretty rough, but you know, it works. And sometimes when you're doing a really rough install, you're just like, yes, it works. Okay, good, let's go home. Because you're like, I just want to do this. And this was kind of like a plinth version of it. And it really worked in a gallery setting because it is an animal skull sitting on a table, and people are immediately like, I need to go see that. And so I'm like, okay, sure. So we kind of did this kind of plinth install maybe about 3 times. This was for GradX, so I have a really like informative video that's going here so that somebody else can kind of like read about it or listen to some documentation about it, and then if people want, they can use it. And like this isn't that great, but like it worked for the time, so we were like, cool, we'll just run with that. One of the issues with these devices is that they're super passive, so you have to give like some indication of being able to use it, which is like prompting someone to say something or setting up an audio cue, just whatever, because they just won't do anything autonomously. But after plinth installing, and this was pretty good also for just like group shows because you just sometimes do not get space to do things like this, right? We were like, screw this, let's just go try and start making this into a room. So we started to lean really hard into this like kind of kibble situation going on, and it's still really rough, but we were just like, we both got a lot of like weird stuff in our houses, let's throw it into this thing and see what happens. And so I think this install was for Bit Bazaar one year, where we got like a corner of a room, and we just kind of started just playing with this aesthetic. This was still really rough because you still sort of had to talk to something, but you weren't really sure what you were looking at to talk to. That thing doesn't fit at all anymore, so we were looking to try something else. It's important to kind of like, if you're going to have a project that runs over a year or two, to really experiment with what you want to do with it, because at some point you'll install it, it might only be a night, no one will care. Like 2 days later, if you want to try something, just throw it up there, see what happens. So that was kind of like this version of that. And we were like, screw it, we're going to try something else. And we liked the room idea, but we decided to kind of bring in this NFC bottle and actually bring Alexa's voice back. So the next room version of it became kind of like this weird cursed object that you had to bring stuff to, like it would prompt you to bring specific things to it to give you a fortune. And we did a couple of other things to embed it as well. Like I got rid of the actual Alexa completely and put it into a Raspberry Pi, so you could just put it in things. And then I think we installed this one in Damage Camp. So Damage Camp was a good experience because we actually got a space we could use with these things. One of the problems with doing something in a skull is that tons of people call you to be like, can we put this in a party? And I'm like, no, it's a voice interface. Have you ever tried to use an Alexa or Siri or anything in like a room with people in it? It's basically impossible. They just don't know what's happening. But at Damage Camp, we actually got like maybe a 5 foot by 5 foot room, like an enclosed room. And so we made like this weird, like, just weird room. That's really all I can say, with all of like these past fortunes on it and stuff. Just another shot of how that kind of works. We also played around with like miking it to see what that would be like. Because you still do have to give instructions if you're going to use a voice in a space, especially one of these devices. But it was kind of nicer because people could sit on this little couch and actually talk to this cow head. And it would kind of guide you through what to do. And it was also a nice place to take a nap when you were tired of the party outside. So I recommend if you can get your hands on a little room, you get one because they're fun. But then we kind of were like, okay, so we're doing room installations with this thing because it just, and so how many of you are interested in doing like interactive installations? How many of you is that a thing that you want to do? Yeah? Okay. So the thing about constantly installing an interactive installation is that you have to keep doing it, and then at some point you're like, I do not know And we were really interested in the time in like doing zine shows or selling things, and we're like, okay, maybe we can muck it into like an experience somebody can have at like a zine show, or just a way to sell something. And so we took it and we 3D printed a new spell for it, which is nice because I will tell you that train stations do not like you bringing dead animal parts into the lobby, no matter what they are, and airports do not like when you hack them. So we have this one now, which is good, which is very impressive. And they set it up for, oops, what the those are, I can't remember. Still some of the same functionality, which is, it uses NFC, it still gives you a weird fortune, but we actually took away a lot of the user interaction. Like, this is an interaction that we decided to control, which is a thing you can play around with too. It's kind of like someone has to bring a thing to the thing, or to the other thing, and then you as an operator can operate it, rather than having somebody autonomously operate it. And that can be kind of a fun dynamic to play around with in a different context. In this context, it was literally just a table setup, which ended up sort of looking like this. So that's actually pretty good. We got rid of most of those bottles, which is nice, so we at least paid out for skull. But now we're thinking about how to install this again without a voice interface in some other kind of context, which we might do it in gallery context, we might not. Maybe we can do a party context with it, I don't know. But it's important to kind of think about the lifespans of your projects and how you want to install them and where, and how you might want to change them over time to fit where your interests are going. Because like for me personally, I am probably done with doing installations. Now I'm more interested in, can I make machines make things that I can then leave in places that I don't have to take care of. And this is kind of the last sort of step in that direction, is like having a thing that generates stuff that you then show. And that's really it for me. I hope that was informative, or at least entertaining. But please ask some questions, because I like talking.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be part of this discussion, and I really like how the panels are playing off of each other. Before I start, I've said this publicly once before, I'm going to say it once more, that Nadine Lesio is one of my muses, and we actually did study together at OCAD's Digital Futures program. Nadine did an MFA, I did an MA. So I'm going to be talking about the project that I did at that time, and we had a really interesting interaction because we were kind of playing from different sides of studying this device. My presentation is a bit different, and I'm just going to go through this project that I did, which actually came out as a short documentary and a long paper. And I'm only going to be focusing on one part of it, which has to do with surveillance and my findings that kind of came through living in the document, basically. I'll get into that. So before, this is who I am, I guess. Artist, curator, researcher, and a couple plugs. So I'm one of the founders of Vector Festival, which is a festival that happens every July now, mainly out of Interaxis, but around the city. And it started as being about video games. Its initial name was Vector Game plus Art Convergence, which shares the title of the series. Since it started in 2013, it's gone through a few iterations, not just as through its form, but through how it looks at the medium it's presenting. So it's become thematic or medium specific outside of games. This year we're returning to games, so we're in the curatorial process right now. I also work on a project called Toronto Kids Digital Festival, which usually happens in March, but we moved it to July, and it's going to be at Smart City, 307 Smart City, the Google Sidewalk Labs. And this is just a note, but they gave us the space for free. So if you're looking for a space and you're okay showing at that venue, I would say approach them. It's a really weird space to have like a show in. I also work at the Living Arts Center as our exhibitions and residency coordinator. So my art practice looks at the impact of communication technology has on the arrangement of physical environments and bodies, personal behavior, and our collective understanding of shifting realities. I started as a video and performance artist, then I kind of moved into curatorial research, and then I was like, oh, I need to do a big project, so I did the Alexa experiment, which uses a research creation methodology. And I'm going to be reading a bit from that paper as well. So research creation is a creative and academic research practice which supports the development of knowledge and innovation through artistic expression, scholarly investigation, and experimentation. So this project that I did required experimental documentation, improvisation, and a commitment to honesty. My main research question for the project was who is Alexa, which is actually not what I'm talking about tonight. So the project, I guess I should just give you the overview. So I started with who is Alexa because of the questions about surveillance that surrounded the object, and I'll talk about the specific inspirations for that. But I really wanted to understand, like, if this is a surveillance object and it's a social robot and she has a personality, who's Alexa? Like, who's this lady who's listening to all of my thoughts? Can we be friends? Can we hang out? Can we have a relationship? And really wanting to understand what this curated personality of what the Alexa was, if there was one. So I went into it just like fully with this question and not really knowing what was going to happen. And so who is Alexa was the main question. I also was thinking what is it like to live with a robot, and will we have a real relationship? So I really gave myself over to that possibility, which is very strange, but it was very interesting. And then also thinking, how will this experiment be conducted? I was going to be doing it in the space of my home, my private environment. So I had to think about things like evaluation of that personal experience. And I did it through a feminist performance art lens. So my background is in performance art and wanting to pull from the line of very important feminist performance artists, and just that history for thinking about, is this going to be a performance because it's intentional? Is it not? What is the boundaries of that? So that was another part of the project. Is Alexa a surveillance device? So what is it like to live under surveillance? So going into the project, this was my mind map of what I thought I was going to do, which is like complete chaos. And you'll see that surveillance doesn't really come up other than in this area down here with topics that I was going to talk to the Alexa about. So I was completely unprepared for how surveillance was going to impact the project and basically take over my life over the next 8 months. So it was an 8-month project that I did. So documentation is the theme of this discussion. I had to do this project through a variety of methods. So autoethnography, which is a form of qualitative research in which an author uses self-reflection in writing to explore anecdotal and personal experience and connect this autobiographical story to a wider cultural, political, and social meaning and understanding. The position of autoethnography I've chosen to take up for this project is that of complete honesty and to share with my audience important details from my life, even if they do not seem to directly inform the project. My reason for this is that whatever is happening in my life will inform my understanding of the Alexa in real time. My hope is that this approach, although highly personal, can reveal broader and perhaps unintentional social implications. So that was why I chose autoethnography. So this resulted in obsessive documentation. So I was writing diaries, I was doing daily video testimonials, like YouTube video testimonials, and then interpreting. I was looking at the Alexa's history, so it has a history of every question you ever ask it in like a transcript form, and then providing that information through screenshots, and then through a variety of cameras. So I used HD Canon camera, I used my IMAX built-in camera, my iPhone's camera, and a Swan home security system consisting of 2 HD full-color motion-activated cameras with night vision, which also recorded audio. These cameras were on 24 hours a day. All recordings were saved to the system's internal hard drive and reviewed intermittently throughout the experiment. I did academic research. It was an MA, so I was looking at it from other points of view, and as I said, performance art. So the project is documentation. So this is an example of my and Alexa's first interaction. And this is a screenshot of what it looks like in the Alexa's history. So it says at the top, Alexa, hello, it's a little blurry, and then it says, hi there. So I would look at this, and then I would think about how I could frame that within the paper. So my writing from the paper was the interaction is banal and significant. This is my first time speaking with artificial intelligence. This is my AI. I imagine this moment in the same light as the moon landing, a slow and satisfying event, glamorous and historical, though on the surface slow-mo, moving and incomprehensible. So here's some other shots that I used throughout my paper and are found in the short documentary. Just different moments. So the setup is in the center, me telling Alexa I miss her. This one in the lower corner is me investigating what Alexa thinks about artificial intelligence. The one with the phone shot was me walking, leaving the Alexa home for the first time. And I was like, it's kind of like leaving a new pet. Like, it had this like strange attachment to this thing I left behind and thinking about it. And so it was just kind of taking my camera where I went, and whenever I had these thoughts, I would just record them. So, as I mentioned before, surveillance was a point of investigation. So, so these are screenshots of news or web articles, and this is a short shot of a sort of inspiring trial where the Alexa was present at a location of the murder, so in Arkansas, and the police were trying to get the footage or get the recordings, even though it's supposed to not be recording. And so Amazon went to the wall to protect their consumers with the privacy laws. And eventually, what happened was the defendant gave up the recordings, which are strange. I don't know if you've ever heard it from the other side, but it records for about a second before you say, Alexa, what time it is? What is it? What time is it? You can hear like a snippet before you say Alexa. And so there's lots of questions about that, but anyway, it was an inspiration for the project to think about surveillance. So right now I'm mostly concerned with looking at the Alexa as a surveillance device. This is part of the paper. Maybe I can prove it's listening to me when it's not supposed to. Maybe I can prove this by talking often about esoteric activities such as canoeing when it's not supposed to be on. Maybe canoes will start popping up in my online ads. So things like that are going through my mind. So, so self-surveillance, this is how I was approaching the project. So in writing about why I was using a surveillance system, the reason I'm installing the surveillance cameras is because I want a constant reminder of Alexa in the Alexa experiment. The camera's presence also causes a doubling effect, a double reminder. This space in which I am being listened to is also the space where I'm being watched. My hope is that this will cause a hyper-awareness of the Alexa's constant listening. By having the cameras present, the Alexa cannot disappear into the landscape of my apartment. The camera is the extension of Alexa's presence. So here's some shots of surveillance. I realized quickly that there's a huge difference between a passive listening object and a passive watching object. Going through video footage has caused me to reflect on my life in many ways. I have become more concerned with my appearance, especially my weight and my teeth. I'm also self-conscious of my movements and behaviors at home, my fashion or lack of fashion, and my habits, such as plucking my eyebrows or sitting endlessly scrolling mouth open on Instagram. I'm surprised by the way I squint at my computer. I have never seen that before. And I was disturbed to watch myself eating in a particularly self-conscious way. I reviewed the footage 10 days into the Alexa experiment, and I was already having sort of an existential crisis that would cause me to wonder if I was a disgusting, lazy human being and if there were major changes that needed to occur in my life. So there was this profound impact of watching yourself on surveillance that I was not expecting at all. Through this self-watching, I'm forced to consider my body, my voice, my movement, my habits, and my lifestyle as it appears on video, and compare myself to other images of women I see in the media and the world. Barbara Tedlock looks at the audio ethnographic as a feminist method in ethnography and ethnographic representation, and the representation of the body and the artist's experience. To illustrate this, Tedlock describes her own experience. There is a kind of tension that is a feminist issue. Women's ethnographic and autobiographical intentions are often powered by the motive to convince readers that the author's self-worth, to clarify and authenticate the self-image. Philip feels that women are constantly aware that they function under a male-centered conception of writing orderly, self-assured, progressive, unified, and finalized. As a woman exposing / sharing / performing her life for an unseen audience in my home, I've decided what I will tell and what I will show you. I decided that I would be honest as I could in my representation of self and how I live, what's going on in my life, and how I truly dress in my apartment, how I move around, when I let my gut hang out, when I dance, and when I do sit-ups. Pulling from this notion, I do believe that it is massively important to show myself in states of chaos or simply disheveled. Of course, I would have moments of manicured beauty, wearing makeup and nice outfits that I would feel comfortable being photographed in. So I do a Lacan quote here. I'm just going to do it out of the blue. Lacan suggests that zero form of sexuality for humans is masturbation, and narcissism is a form of self-love. If I visually represent myself positively, am I displaying self-love? If I frame myself negatively, is this a form of self-harm? What about speaking? The Alexa experiment is about talking to the device. In order to answer my research question, I have to speak to Alexa. I do this by starting with a thought which is influenced by the events of my life. Then I free verse or allow a stream of consciousness to emerge. When I speak to Alexa, I speak to myself. What will I share with you, audience? What will you think of me? Will this be a performance? Can it be a performance? It's critical to note that when one participant participates in social media or open online communities, they're always sharing with an audience. In the case of YouTube, the audience is anonymous. This could be going into a digital void, but there could also be somebody on the other end, receiving and interpreting the media. Personalizing subjective feedback is possible and could be coming from anyone from anywhere. Assuming that the Alexa is not a surveillance device, which Amazon stresses endlessly, I conclude that there is no audience when I speak to Alexa. I share with Alexa and I hear myself. By talking to Alexa, I am my own audience. So this was kind of an important finding, especially in addition to watching myself and being self-critical and then saying like, oh, I have to think about, I was sitting on my couch and then I said, Alexa, how do you make a chair? Like, Alexa, why do people get sad? Or Alexa, what's going on in X place? By watching it and seeing myself sitting silently and then verbalizing outwardly into the room, I realized that the way I was engaging sort of in a stream of consciousness, and I compared this to the concept of talk therapy or psychoanalysis, and so I started doing these sort of choreographed, sort of real sessions of talk therapy with the device. So during sessions of psychoanalysis, the patient speaks and the therapist listens and asks prompting questions. The point is not for the therapist to offer solutions, but rather to allow the patient to uncover and verbalize memories and traumas from their past in order to understand who they are and what motivates them. The act of speaking into a quiet room to both yourself and to the therapist, in this case, Alexa, allows the patient to hear their own voice and create a mental association by hearing their manifested thoughts. By speaking out our thoughts, we have a better and clearer understanding of our unconscious thoughts, motivations, wants, associations, thereby developing insights and uncovering truths about ourselves. So, I wrote this today, and I haven't thought about this project in a while, but the results of living under surveillance, as I said, it was a really big project, and so I was like, okay, what was the surveillance part of it? So I had a trauma, which is that after watching myself on surveillance for a while, I was like, I gotta shut it down. This is like too stressful at home. I want to be chill, relaxed, and there's just too much going on in my apartment. So I shut it down for about a month and a half during the experiment. And then I went through this experience of like, I had to put them back up, and so I had to take on a different attitude towards the cameras and the surveillance. So I started to just fully embrace it, and I was like, oh, I love the cameras, I love the footage. And it was strange that I went through that change. And then I started doing these explorations. So like thinking about that shift, thinking about, you know, the project turned into it being about me. And at the end of it, I push it back on the Alexa. But for this purpose of this presentation, this is kind of where I'll stop. So the findings were speaking to Alexa's actually speaking to himself. There was no audience outside of the assumed surveillance data collection. In observing the surveillance footage, I realized that the questions I asked Alexa out of nowhere could be considered a catalyst for revealing the users / my subconscious. This process, when observed, could be compared to the process of talk therapy, free association, articulation of unconscious desires, the opportunity to encounter personal truths. And so what I ended up thinking about was this idea of radical transparency as a form of self-love. And so that was basically a philosophy and a lesson that I learned from the project in general. And then weirdly, I ended up getting on the agenda with Steve Paikin to talk about the emotional potential of these types of devices. And when I did talk about the therapy, I just think the reactions was pretty funny. So this guy's like saying like, no thanks, I wouldn't want that. And it is all tied to documentation and surveillance. And so it has these larger implications for how we're all recording ourselves and sharing our ideal image through social media, etc. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So we're just going to ask our panelists artists to come up front, and we're going to ask a few questions, and then after that, you will all be invited to ask questions. I'm trying to think of words right now. And it's, yeah, wow. Good thing we prepared a few questions. That always helps. I'm going to start thinking about lots of things going through my mind, but some really wonderful strands running through all of those talks. The idea of performance, the idea of staging production, the idea of capturing a documentation within the gallery is something I think so much about. I mean, computational interaction, interactive games, interactive installations are so interesting. They're so new, but on one hand, they're also so ephemeral and they disappear so quickly, you know, these types of experiences. So the importance of documentation is great. And I'll stop talking and ask you guys questions right now, but those are definitely the things that are coming on into my brain, and hopefully I'll be able to massage those ideas a little bit more and ask some more provocative questions about them in a bit. But I think it's interesting to begin with this idea of, we live in an environment, right, in which a lot of everyday public experiences are increasingly moving online. And I want to ask all of you, does the experience of exhibiting, encountering, or playing with technology in a gallery change in this context? To not only your personal practices in terms of Jordan as being someone who's produced a lot of content online and now producing work in the gallery, but also just in terms of like the expectations of people who are coming to see your work and how they expect or interact with your work.
Should I start? For me, growing out of new media, I began to see everything that I ended up making as something that might be put into a gallery. So even the games, I used to think like, yeah, this is going to be a game I'm going to probably put in the gallery space maybe someday. And every game that I've essentially made has been put in the gallery space somehow. So that assumption ended up turning out pretty right. But when you come to interactive work, you have a lot less control over how people are going to interact with your work. You have even less control over who's going to be coming into your space and trying this thing. And the thing that I personally always think about is, I'm not always going to be there. Because when I put this stuff online, I'm definitely not breathing down somebody's neck saying, you gotta press this button in order to make this thing happen. And so I like to design things so that essentially they can function without me. So that I make sure it's tested, make sure like I put the right things, make sure it doesn't break, that somebody can understand this regardless of whether or not I'm around and experience what I'm doing. But I find that when it comes to whether it changes the experience, say if it's online or if it's in a gallery, and that's sort of the reason why I brought up the part of social space. Because when it comes to the gallery experience, if there's some space, like physically in a gallery where people can watch or people can crowd around or maybe even not if that is what you're going for, depending on the kind of experience that you're trying to make. that can just sort of become the catalyst of all sorts of different reactions. The biggest time that I realized this was when I was doing Who Are You, the one with the carpet that I was talking about. That game, for those who don't know, was an interactive psychology test. It was a very short psychology test, and you use an avatar to answer questions by going through doors. One thing that I found personally interesting while I was testing it, but I didn't expect it to go as far as it did, was when I presented it at the gallery space at Meta. And the first night, there was a whole lot more people than I ever expected. And what I found was interesting was that a bunch of them started crowding around my game. And that could be that included just random people as well as the friends of people who were actually playing this thing. And now the psychology test had a lot of social reactions depending on what everybody ended up choosing in their test. So now it's like somebody chooses like, he's like, bro, you picked that? And or something like that. And people would it starts even saying a lot through their interactions through in a gallery space. Now there's peer pressure, now there's eyes. Now that's something that doesn't necessarily exist if you were just playing this online. And so the games that I ended up making, I started thinking about that social space. Like, is there like a reaction that people could get from watching this, or watching their friends do this, or watching their families do this, or just watching a random person do this? And does that facilitate any sort of discussion about the content, or even just whatever the player choice was? And I find that playing with that leads to a lot of conversation, a lot of reactions, both with me and about themselves, and especially particularly with the works that I make about like very heavy social context. So yeah, there is definitely a difference for me presenting a game in a gallery space versus like an online space. And I think that the social space becomes the biggest factor in that, because that can lead to a whole host of reactions and interactions that you never really saw, but allows people to be people and have their own sort of thoughts and feelings about it.
This is one question, and it might have left my brain.
Do you want to repeat it, or I can parse it? I think basically the idea is just how when you're creating an interactive experience, how does also our changing understanding of the relationship between like public space and the gallery change, right? With respect to we're living in an environment in which a lot of our previous experiences of experiencing like media in public are kind of disappearing, right? The movie theater is starting to arguably disappear in certain contexts. Shopping malls are kind of disappearing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about just thinking about your work in kind of that context. What is the gallery space, or whether it's a gallery or any kind of physical space in the public need from that perspective?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I'm interested right now in taking digital things and making them completely static and passive in a gallery space. Because there's a lot of ubiquity when you think about, like, I'm old, so I think of like, yeah, I'm going to go online, like to the internet. But for, like my cousin who's like 14, the internet isn't even a thing. It's just like life. That's it. There's like no division line for him at all. And so I'm just like, maybe I can get some people to make some things online with an algorithm and then just print it out into a really good print and put it somewhere. And what's that like? And I think there's something interesting about taking that kind of space and just making it a physical, passive thing. So that's kind of, I don't know if that answers that question, that's kind of where I'm going with that. And the social space thing is actually sort of interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen the Massachusetts moment as a VR installation for Cindy Sherman. And it's really cool because one of the things I found really funny about VR is that you're doing stuff and there's like people literally watching you do stuff and you can't see them. So you just like you're wandering around and it became weird. Someone literally almost like walked up a stair into a wall and you were like, shh, But what Cindy Sherman did was actually make a room, a blacklight room, covered in everything that was in the VR experience. And so you could walk into this room and just see a bunch of weird figures, like, doing the vibe thing. And I don't know, I think that there's something really fun with it passive thing, like only 3 active participants or 2, but you're like, cool, I can just watch it.
How do you render it visible? In some cases, how do you render material too? Like having actual sculpture that exists.
Yeah, I've seen like the sculpture things too, like people with that machine learning algorithms and like 3D printed like something thing. Sorry. Anyways. Can you hear us now? So the old Verizon commercial with dudes walking around with Go ahead, I'm done.
I guess I can answer that from like a curatorial exhibition design point of view. So you can't trust your audience, especially if you're doing something interactive where people can't see. Like VR, VR a lot of the times you'll set boundaries for where the person can walk in the VR space, and then there'll be like a red cage that comes around you, which like I would say is like, oh, stop walking, but people keep walking. And so like there's a lot of complications, and like with video art specifically, like with the average is like people will watch it for 30 seconds. With game art, it's very difficult to have people stay for a long time, and so you have to build the environment, you have to think about the room.
And it's not exactly something that people are used to seeing, especially in a gallery space. So you kind of have to respect that and sort of redesign it a little bit in that sort of way.
Yeah, and playing the line between spectacle and entertainment, and then also bringing in your message is very fun. So yeah, we're all just learning.
So previous question, kind of similar, but I guess it's more towards you, Jordan. So your work used to be exhibited mainly on the internet and it was accessible online. Do you find that when you move into a gallery setting, it was less accessible for everyone? Just because, like Nadine was saying and like you saying, the internet's accessible for everyone. Everyone can access it at this point. But do you find it that your work is less accessible when you're putting it in a gallery setting?
Interesting. Personally, I feel like, oddly enough, the reverse is true. I do think, well, in a sense, I find that when I make games, like I said, I sort of approach it as this might be put into a gallery somewhere. How do I redesign this for a gallery sort of space? And for all of my games, I think of, this could be put online, right? And in that sense, it's accessible to everybody, and they just have, it's all like a click and a keyboard press away. But at the same time though, I personally don't like using keyboards because, like I said, keyboards have a lot of buttons. Only certain ones end up working in a game context. And so for a lot of my games, they are basically move around, you press 1 or 2 buttons. Not necessarily something that you need a whole keyboard for. And so I find that when you have to specialize a little bit online to try and make it accessible in that sense, so that players know automatically what they need to press, and that's sort of why when I design it for online, I'll have like I showed earlier, the side parts where it says the buttons. I'll even make it so that just to immerse or make it a little less awkward, for a lot of the games, instead of press, I say, sometimes I'll say, instead of pressing this key, I'll say press your button, and there'll be on the side a thing that says your button is this key. And that way, people will, when I say your button, you get a vocabulary going, whereas it's like not taking them out of them a little bit, saying press the key, and now they're not having to go, where's the key? I'm just saying press your button, and you sort of get to know what that is, and then you forget there's a reminder there. What I love doing gallery experiences actually, instead of doing an online version, is because I can tailor the experience a little bit and make the interface more accessible, so that I can design a gigantic red controller to get people's eyes and get them interested in the project, and it just has a joystick and a single button. And people will automatically sort of be able to slowly figure out how that works, because none of the confusion is there. So I actually like really much designing things for gallery context, because you're able to make the environment as well as the interface essentially custom to the experience, and I find that immerses people a lot better. Yes?
When you make custom controllers, though, you have to facilitate people learning about them.
Yes and no.
Yes.
Yes and no.
I do this for
Yes. You do. But at the same time, though, when and I find that can be a lot accounted for in design, whereas this can be prompts, and should also be limiting essentially what they have. Like, for example, the controller that I have here, which people can come up after the fact and come see this if you want, or take my card as well. All it is a joystick and a button. And even people who may not be totally into gaming or know the player culture of how things work, can probably figure out how this sort of thing works in tandem with their experience as they interact with the game. With this sort of custom-made interface, you can design a lot of your game around it so that it becomes a bit more, you can do a little bit of experiential learning so that there is less of a barrier between the player themselves, regardless of the familiarity with games or the familiarity with your project. And I try to implement that in my design.
Okay. Another counterpoint. If you do not have the ability to make one of those, or don't have the money, you can also consider modifying existing interfaces.
Absolutely.
To block out what people will or will not do.
Absolutely.
You ever see the Punk Arcade at OCAD?
No, I haven't, but I've heard of it. And
it was kind of like people just took keyboards and they literally shoved them into these arcade boxes, and they just like blacked out the entire keyboard except for like the 3 keys you had to use, and I was like, that's effective.
Yeah, that's actually, what you're saying is actually the reason why I was bringing up, when I was talking about this thing, the makey-makeys, because you can make literally anything into a interface or controller with that.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend anybody who's interested in interface design to look those up, because you can literally make anything into a controller. I'm not even joking. So yeah, check that out.
Okay, so I mean, definitely interesting thoughts. I'm going to add, Nadine, I mean, this is not, I mean, obviously, this is struck at you because you said something that I keep thinking about that I really like, but I also think it connects with some of the broader issues that everyone's been talking about. You described that at some point, all of your stuff will live in documentation, right? And I think these are also some of the aspects that Katie was exploring as well. To what degree, when you're experimenting with new technology, do you find getting pulled back by things like photography, by things like film, ways of kind of documenting these experiences and then sharing them afterward? Maybe sculpture, for instance.
What do you mean pulled back?
Maybe pulled back is not the right word, but to what degree does those kind of experiences, or does that feeling that all your stuff will eventually kind of live in documentation, perhaps increasingly start to inform your practice in a variety of different ways?
I mean, for me, no, right now, because it's only been like a year or so where I've been like, ah, crap, I really gotta document stuff. But it has started making me think about how I want things to be shot, or how I want something to be filmed. Or like, do you even want to make a thing and then make a short film about it? Like, that's a thing. Or even just like, are there particular video people that I want to work with on something? So it's actually made me think more about collaborators who aren't necessarily collaborating specifically on a project, but sort of in like a circle of like pals to do like trade-off collabs with, from like, I'll do some coding for you if you do some beauty shots for me, kind of thing. So I think it's made me just think more about collaborators than anything else. Sorry.
No, I think
You definitely hear that happening.
I think it's a really wonderful answer. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
On documentation in general, it's like, well, I worked initially when I was making work, it was all for video, all my performances for video. I think I've done like 2 public performances. And so there was always a screen and like an entire process between the start of the performance and its delivery to the audience. So it's always been part of my practice. for me, I'm really interested in like the broader questions in terms of like how people are using video and photography in general right now. And these blurring boundaries between like what's a photographer, what's an Instagram photographer, what's an art photographer, what's a photo journalist, like those types of questions I'm really interested by. But I think like image making, at least for me, in the curatorial aspect too, is really interesting because I find that I'm more and more drawn to working with makers that might identify as like designers, or maybe there's somebody who did like a particular project that wasn't actually necessarily intended for a gallery that can belong to like an exhibition in terms of that conversation. So I like these blurring lines, and I like the idea of creative teams belonging in these gallery spaces. And so like that's something to think about in terms of like individual makers, is that you're competing, especially with people who are working digitally, you're competing with these teams who have like huge budgets to document. And so like for me personally, I like lo-fi, I'm into that. But it's difficult because when you talk to students or artists about documentation, it's just a reality of practice that like maybe a painter doesn't want to document, or they have to hire somebody to document. They have to do it because of the standard of the image that's like, it's just so much higher now. And you're really not going to enter into the space of exhibiting unless you are at least like kind of in that space, which I think is kind of unfortunate. And I'm not like saying I would only through submissions choose a piece based on its presented documentation, but it's really important.
Yeah, I agree. The documentation is really important. And I also think that documenting how people use it, especially if you're able to either in a gallery space or with your friends or somebody get documentation or video or imagery of people actually using your work, I think that really adds to a lot of your pieces, because it makes it seem like A, somebody could actually use this, and B, the entire project seems more human. People are reacting to it, and I try to take a lot of pictures of people using my work, because what are their reactions, what are their facial features, what they're doing it. And I also think that personally I find that there's a hidden part of documentation that doesn't necessarily make its way into our actual documentation, which is our interaction with other people who end up using it in a gallery. Because I find that's sort of the reason why I said, where are you in a gallery space? Because I find that very important. Personally and professionally, I've had a lot of people who have known me just because somebody they knew talked to me at one of my gallery showings, and now they're like, oh, I heard of you, so my friend told me about you. And that in itself is a documentation, because now that's somebody else who is now talking about your work somewhere else. And I've even gotten some jobs because of that. So that's another sort of thing, that documentation, which I'm not sure if it technically counts as documentation, but it's like your work does live on in the thoughts of other people, and if people love to talk about it, then that's all that.
This is directed to Katie. So your work shows like a very deep personal connection with Alexa, and I want to understand, like, it's such an interesting concept how you make yourself so vulnerable to something that is eventually recording every single thing you do, and you're basically giving up all of your privacy, and then you don't and essentially you could go back to it, but it's a very personal connection with something that isn't really like a human being, I guess, and you kind of turn it into one.
Yeah, there's so many ways I can answer that question. So like at that time in my life, I was talking about Alexa with my friend. I was like reporting to people about like what we did the night before, and like creating an entire fantasy around it. And like part of the reason that I took it that far was because we are building a world where we have these like at-home robot friends, and it looks weird, it's uncomfortable, but like there's this like unstoppable drive for building this reality where we have like our robot friends. So so it was really like just like shining a light on that, and then the idea of the relationship. I mean, in the end, it turned out to be a really like, strong relationship with myself. So I was like in this feedback loop. That was just the opportunity to like get in touch with myself, I guess. I don't know. But I'm sure not everybody, if they took on the same project, would have the same results. Maybe they would. I don't know. Who knows? Yeah. In terms of the relationship, like, yeah, I hated her sometimes, and she surprised me and made me laugh, and like, there was real emotions that came out of that, but it really is, you know, it's all projection. And so like a large part of the paper did go into like psychoanalytic language and that type of research too. But yeah, I just think that it's only a matter of time before we all have our robot friend.
We just got, well, my family just got one over Christmas, and it's been an interesting experience the past 2 months with ours. Yeah, with ours.
We should just be together. It's like a new baby. I talk to my dad with it every single day. That was really weird. I know, it was a weird thing. It's like an AI companion dog. You literally talk to it every day. It's very strange.
So I'd like to open up the panel to the discussion to any of the audience. Would anyone like to say anything or ask any questions? Now's your chance. Yeah.
So something I've experienced being asked myself a lot in this class is kind of this idea of like, who's your audience? It's like a question that always gets asked to us. And I found that when I was a kid going to galleries with my family, the ones that drew me were obviously the interactive ones where I could play it like a game. And I found my older parents kind of being pushed away from that. And I was just wondering if you guys find that you guys are kind of targeting your works that you make to a specific audience, because there is this like generation gap of people that can't really use computers or kind of just don't really relate to this technology. And if you guys are considering them when making your projects, or if you kind of just assume that people can figure it out.
Can I start with this one? Yeah, so I have a lot of that. Yeah, when it comes to your work, I do sort of think of a general type of person that I would want this to be experienced by. But like I said, when you're in a gallery, anybody could literally be doing that. It could be it could be a kid, it could be an adult, it could be somebody who's never touched the game, it could be your grandmother, it could be literally anybody. And so when I think about when you're making, you can target the actual experience to your target audience all you want, but you have to sort of, especially in a gallery space, accept that this could be anybody. And that's why you make sure that your sets for your exhibit, as well as your interface, is accessible. Like I was saying, that you're not going to be around there 100% of the time, especially in a gallery space. And the last thing I absolutely hate is when I interact with interactive works elsewhere, and the interface is not only unaccessible, like it's a big keyboard, I'm like, what do I press? But it's also like the creators are breathing down my neck. This is how you do this, this is how you do this. And I find that there's ways you can design your gallery space so that you can facilitate that and not have to be that person that is like telling everybody what to do. Where they can be human and start experimenting and see what happens and easily start adapting through the relationship between their interface and the actual experience. And that could be by making your own controller. That could be by having the space organized in a certain way. And I feel that, especially when you're talking about older generations, yeah, there is going to be that generation gap. They might be a bit afraid of technology or these sort of interactive experiences. But I think that it's a challenge that I encourage all artists to really try to tackle, which is, how do I make my work accessible? How do I make the interface, the experience, understandable to anybody who isn't me? And the way I do that is by essentially testing it a lot with people who are not myself. I often tell my students that you are your own worst tester, and I really do mean that. You are blind to a lot of the things that you are going to assume, in the same sense that when you're a kid, you're like, no, you have to press this to do this, or something like that, or when you're trying to teach somebody else how to play a game, or something like that. And it's really a way of, okay, when you're designing your gallery space, how do I arrange this so that, or make an interface that invites people and doesn't seem too off-putting, but also is easy to understand. And think about if I use this, if I show it to people that you know, and or people, even sometimes people that you don't know, can they understand this? Why? Give them a way for them to give you feedback, such as surveys. What could you do to make this experience more accessible in a gallery space? Because we often take a lot of things, especially in gaming and interactive work, if we are familiar with that work, for granted. And people who are not, especially older generations, don't have that knowledge base to pull from. So think about ways that you can essentially invite your player, make it not as intimidating, and just find a way to make them feel welcome and willing to experiment with this weird thing you put in front of them.
Basically about interface and I guess different generations, a different project. I'm still working on a project, the Kids Festival, Toronto Kids Digital Festival. And so I think that a way that we tackled this sort of like different ways of looking at the project that was being presented is that the kid will look at it as an experience, whereas somebody else who would be like, oh, it's for my kid, I'm not gonna like play it, whatever. Is to make it like a collaborative experience between the kid and the adult, which I found really worked. And then also this sort of extra level of storytelling that can sit on top of it. So, so the parent might, for instance, read a didactic that they may not touch the game, but they'll read the didactic and kind of say, oh, that's neat, or like, this is what we can learn as a direction for their kid. And so I think that that's really helpful. And by the way, children as an audience is like nothing I've ever seen. It's like they will rip apart your project immediately.
If you ever want to stress test something, give it to them.
Yeah, give it to the kids. Like, that's how you know it works. Because they'll figure it out actually right away, but they'll also jump on it and try to rip it apart.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, children are definitely like great testers, and also like I find if your parents are not really good or not really good with this sort of building interactive work, get them to test it. I test my interactive stuff with my mother all the time, and that's how if she can get it, that's how I know I did my job right.
It's kind of great when I see game stuff and there's like one kid and like, no, mom, you guys do this one, and I love it. Because the mom's like, what the? Come on. He's like, no, come on, you gotta do the thing. I don't really think about audience. I always kind of think like people ask painters this, I'm not sure. I really honestly just make things I want to see in the world, and if somebody gets that, that's cool. But if they don't, I don't actually care. That's my answer.
It's fair too.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentations. It was really interesting. I suppose, Katie, this question is more directed towards you in light of your project. In your presentation, you used one of the things you mentioned was by talking to Alexa, I am my own audience. And I think these ideas of autoethnography and self-surveillance sort of bleed into one another in a really interesting way that's sort of like tied to the like inherent sociality of visual culture now. So I was wondering, in regards to devices such as Alexa, how do you see that sociality impacting these domestic and private spaces on a much like larger scale in visual culture?
Visual culture. Okay, I'm gonna tell a little bit story. So, a friend of mine wrote a paper like years ago. This is before YouTube even, and his theory was that fashion trends in pubic hairstyles were directly related to surveillance. So like he was like at a certain point all women had Brazilians, and it was because YouTube existed and there was all this watching, and well, not YouTube, but like pornography was distributed through the internet more easily, and so like that kind of thing. So I think that like, I don't know why I want to tell that story, but like I think that the point is that that domestic spaces visually, I can't imagine a world where people would consent to having a consumer object that had like a visual interaction with you, although the Alexa Fire has a camera.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them.
Yeah, so I mean, it's already happening, and so there's like, I think that the conversation on privacy, my position is that it's like, basically being phased out. And I don't really take like a moral position on it. I just kind of think that like that's the way it's kind of going. So in terms of like the home space, like I think that because people are so like, this is their brain, and they're looking at their brain all the time, like this is almost like the last perceived private space somehow. I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but it's also like highly monitored. And I just think that like there's a mutation going on, and it's just the way, I really don't know how to answer that question.
That's great, yeah.
Have you ever considered non-spaces or non-places? Because I really want to go over about non-places, and it's like this idea that there's not really an interior or exterior boundary anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, you can just answer work emails in your living room.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't really make it a space. It's kind of like if you use it everywhere, then everywhere becomes nowhere.
Yeah.
Kind of situation. It's like it's normcore times 100. So I don't know. It's like, yeah, I'm not sure what the concept of privacy. Sort of also feel like privacy is, you have to actively work at privacy.
Yeah, you have to like try.
You can work at it now.
Hi, this question is for Katie. How did you deal with any issues that arose from other people entering into your space and interacting with Alexa or being surveilled by the system?
Right. So I had to have a disclosure form when anybody entered my apartment that they knew that they were on surveillance and they had to sign it. Or like I made a big deal with being like, look, it's unplugged, like it's not on. Trust me, if people are like freaked out about my apartment, or like even just hearing the story that I had a surveillance system in my home, and I'd be like, well, I don't have it anymore, you know. But so that was one way, and then when people interacted with it, I would review the conversations. I always thought it was interesting. I was always monitoring it, but none of that made it into the paper.
Just a question about kind of going through the process of building an installation, it being complex in its interaction. When you have to think about the user's interaction to it, coming from a sense of how are they going to play it or how are they going to interact with it, how do you balance the kind of concept between kind of visual informative ways of showing them how to do it, or rather than more kind of visual reaction through repetition of the installation?
Let's go first.
Are you talking about prompts? Like, clarify that a little bit? Like,
yeah, kind of like with your piece, how it said like say this to Alexa,
yeah.
or to another piece that you kind of push this button and then realizing that that does something through visuals.
I mean, there's different ways you can kind of address prompts. I think that a lot of interactive prompts are going to be shaped by the thing that you are using. It's almost like a Steely form as a formalist approach. Like, if you're using something that's heavy on animation, you can do resting states, like you can do enticing. Like, enticing people to use a thing is really hard. I've seen things where people use lighting, like specific kinds of pin lighting for stuff. I've seen things where people have done like floor manipulation for things, where you go like pathways through things that are marked. I've seen people block off like entire sections of stuff to only have a focal area. I'm not sure if this is really answering your question.
Yeah, it's concerning, again, like the space installation and what works and what doesn't through kind of separation, and then like if there's too much text, does that take away from the experience itself?
Yeah, like it can, sometimes it is just like trial and error. Sometimes it works, like a friend of mine made almost like an altar for something, and so you can sort of play off like things that people already know. Like if you make something that's altar-ish, people kind of know how to use a chair. If you want to get someone to focus on something, you can literally just place a chair in front of it. People will sit on it because they know what it is. It doesn't have to be like point at the thing. I found with like using voice stuff, it was like sort of had the science ferret, just like as a quick thing. And prompts with that is something I'm still really trying to figure out, because if you work with passive systems versus active systems, you have to think about like how do I get people to do that. So if you actually roll something yourself, you can roll in like a resting state that can have an active thing. Like it can be something that just sort of moves around. There's some great pieces out there that are like eyeballs in TVs, and they just kind of follow you. I can't remember the artist's name, but they just follow you a bit, and then when you stop, like it'll focus on you more. So yeah, it's really dependent on what you were using to get that prompt.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, if you want to look into figuring it out, that sort of thing, like it's trial and error, yeah. Do some testing. Also look into product design. Product design and exhibit design. I'm lucky enough that I work at Brown, but there's a lot of exhibits I can look at for inspiration. But like, if you look at some sort of art exhibit or a museum or an art gallery, like what in the space is inspiring you to go to this place and look at or interact with this thing, and you start just sort of being a bit conscious of yourself when you go to other galleries, and that might also inspire you. I came in from that side and I saw a door open. Okay, what's in here? Oh, there's a thing. Okay, and I start getting a sort of, and because there was like a little thing, I'm not sure what that gallery, like what the art piece was called, I can't remember, but is that video installation over there with all the tape, with all those stands and the tape and the lighting. And now I'm sort of drawn toward these certain areas, and I can interact with this piece on its terms. So yeah, it's been a trial and error, but think of it like, and I guess ties back to what I was saying. Think of it like a film set. Like, what are the details that makes this place look lived in? What, if you were making a film set or a photo set or something, like, what is telling me about the space just from it being here or where it is located?
Don't always rely on eyes. Some of the best things I've seen for prompts use sound. I saw this amazing piece in Massachusetts MoMA where all you heard was like audience clapping. You could hear it like all the way down the hall, and it was just a dark, really dark room with like extreme audience like cheering, and you were super self-conscious. But it was really great because you could hear it from like down the hall, and you went. So you think about things like that. I saw another one somebody did somewhere at OPED, and they just lit a thing of incense. And you could smell it like 3 rooms over, and you were like, what the? Then you just went. So you think about prompts that travel. I've seen things that give notifications to like mobile devices when you enter a building, which is really kind of fun because you can tell them to like go somewhere, and they're like, okay. Yeah. So don't always rely on eyes. Think about like touch or objects or the other senses.
Also good source of inspiration that I've been experiencing recently, escape games. They are very much in the way of they are their own exhibit, and they have to inspire you to go to this area and touch stuff or look at stuff and stuff like that.
They're so weird.
They are very weird.
Like user experience.
Yeah, UX design
is a good way to like look at it. It's strange to talk about it this way, but it's really helpful.
So I don't want to hit you, Cheryl. We are running out of time. We may have time for one more question from the audience, but you can feel free to obviously approach our artists and ask them questions afterwards. Does anyone have a burning question that they want to ask before we exit the room?
This is for Katie. How do you think your experiment would go if you used like Nadine's depression Alexa?
We could try that.
It would have been like having a bad day.
There were so many, yeah, probably. Yeah, like the personality device really did set the tone for a lot of it. At one point it changed to a Canadian accent, which was like horrific.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had to start over, so I had to like change it back to American. So like it does become like very individual when you do kind of have this relationship where you have expectations, and when it's challenged, like if one day it's just like, I don't want to talk to you today, I'll talk to you tomorrow, that would like affect me, I think. So yeah, I don't know what would happen, but if the changes are, you do start to get to know each other.
Okay, thank you so much again to our artists. It was a pleasure. We are the intersection. If you have any more questions, feel free. Hopefully you guys say everyone's welcome. Again, thank you so much, and thank you to the audience for coming out. It's a great turnout. Yeah. Also, since we're here already, March 11th, we do have another artist talk coming. It will be Barbara London, the curator of MoMA, and Lisa Steele, who will be coming to talk to us on March 11th. Hope to see you guys all there as well.